Hi everyone and welcome to my session for Scottish Summit 2024. In this session I'm going to be talking about Azure VMware Solution and asking, is it the right choice for your Azure workloads? First of all, before we get into the session, I want to give a big thanks to our sponsors. Our online streaming sponsor is Proximo 3 and our digital sponsors are Locodera, Rita Consulting and Cubix. And without them, this wouldn't be happening and I wouldn't be here talking to you, and none of the digital sessions would be happening for Scottish Summit 2024. Little bit about me before I jump in. I'm Michael Durkan. I am Azure Practice Lead at Avanade UKI. I am Microsoft Azure MVP, LinkedIn Learning Instructor, speaker, and a blogger. And I'm a big mental health advocate, and it is okay not to be okay. It's okay to talk to people. It's okay to reach out. Make sure you do that, and that's what the community is all about. We've got a great community here and there's always someone there to listen and to help. You can reach out to me on any of my social channels. I've got them listed here. I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find my website, michaeldurkan.com. I'm on Twitter because I can't bear to call it X, at DurkanM. My GitHub is Michael Durkan. I have an at DurkanM YouTube channel, and you can email me if you want. That's what the community is about, and that's what talking to people is all about. I'm always open to emails and always open to talk to people, and you'll find me at michael@michaeldurkan.com. Nice and easy one to remember. So without further ado, let's get into the session and let's do an overview first of what is Azure VMware Solution. So Azure VMware Solution is, as the name suggests, it's a full VMware environment hosted on Azure. You can integrate it with native Azure services and management tools such as networking, portal, etc. And we'll get a little bit more into that as the session goes through. What does it do for you? It enables the seamless migration of VMware workloads to Azure. You can use unified management tools, and you're going to utilize your existing VMware toolset and tools like vCenter and vMotion and HCX, which we'll get into a little later on in the session. And you've also got full support for the other native VMware add-ins like vSphere, vSAN, and NSXT, and they'll all run natively within Azure VMware Solution. So why has it become such a big topic? Well, it has become such a big topic, and there's a lot of people talking about it in the industry. So there's a bit of a timeline here. Back in November of last year, November 2023, Broadcom completed its acquisition of VMware. And things started to move very, very quickly. And if we think of where we are now, that's almost a year ago, things have moved very quickly along the chain here. There was a transition to a subscription-based model and a termination of VMware licensing agreements. In January then, we saw the end of perpetual licensing, so everything moved to a subscription-based model. Normally, perpetual licensing would have been lifetime licensing for some customers, and for small customers, that hit pretty hard because they made the investment, thought their VMware licensing was going to be there forever. Unfortunately not. Everything's gone to subscription now. In February, we then saw the sale of the end user computing division. But more importantly, we also saw the end of the free vSphere hypervisor. And if we remember what that was the VMware Workstation hypervisor. You could run up to 10 VMs for free. Great tool. We all used it for labs. Small businesses still use it, but no more free hypervisor for anyone. And then a bigger milestone in April 2024, VMware on AWS, and was no longer sold, and it was pulled from distribution by AWS and its channel partners. So the lack of options that were available to customers to get off VMware on premises was suddenly very narrow, and that's where Azure VMware Solution comes in. Let's take a look at the changes and what the changes were and what the impact was on customers. So first of all, there was changes to the VMware product portfolio. If we dig a little bit deeper into that, what VMware did at that point was Broadcom VMware, what they decided to do was they decided to bundle up their offerings. So instead of being able to buy the products that you wanted individually, you had to buy a bundle of products. So you might have wanted to buy VMware Enterprise hypervisors, but with that bundle, you also needed to buy things like Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, which some customers may not have wanted to use, but they had to buy it as part of the solution. And it also meant there was kind of add-ons then that had to be bought as well, such as vSAN. I mentioned the end to the free vSphere hypervisor. Again, that hit small customers very hard because they would have kind of used that, the small kind of, single shop offerings that would have had, all of their systems running on a single VMware with no licensing commitment. Mentioned the move from perpetual subscription models. That was a really big one, because again, you buy a perpetual license, you think it's always going to be there, you're getting the support for it, or you're paying an additional support fee on top, no matter how small that was. Subscription model changes that, obviously, and also because you have to buy a bundle with all of these additional products that you may not use. Is it really cost effective for you? We're then getting into a kind of a bigger one, and this is around the pricing increases. And the pricing increases are going up, okay? And what happened here with the pricing increase was, back in 2020, VMware changed its license metrics, okay? And for the popular products, it went from per CPU to per core, and you had an entitlement of 32 cores per CPU for each license or subscription that you had, okay? But in 2023, just prior to the Broadcom acquisition, this went down to an entitlement of 16 cores per CPU. So do the maths. What does that mean? In effect, what it means is that your licensing costs automatically doubled overnight, okay? And for, not just small customers, but for the bigger customers, if you think of doubling your license cost, that's huge. If you're spending, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds or euros on VMware licensing, all of a sudden that figure is doubled. How do you justify that? So that took a big impact. That was a massive impact on customers. So why should you move to Azure VMware Solution? Well, there's really 4 use cases for why you should move. Let's run through them here. The first one is your data center exit, okay? That might be a time when you need to do an infrastructure refresh, or if you want to consolidate all of your offerings up to the cloud and migrate, okay? Second one there, disaster recovery. You might want to use, instead of having to buy new hardware, new VMware licenses to host your disaster recovery, you might want to use your DR and host that up on Azure VMware Solution. You might also want to replace your existing DR, or the other option is you might have a need to extend your existing DR footprint without buying new hardware. Let's move on then to the next one, the data center extension, which kind of, ties in very well with the last point. You might want to expand your footprint. And again, you might want to make the investment in buying the new hardware, buying the licenses. Let's extend the footprint up into Azure VMware Solution. You may want to take a lot of what you're using on premises, on your on-premises VMware, and put that up into the cloud. And that might be for the likes of VDIs or published apps, or your test and dev environments. You might want to take those out of your on-premise environments, put them up into Azure VMware Solution. The other option is hybrid cloud extension. You might want to have a full hybrid cloud. Take your Azure VMware Solution, your VMs that you've been running, get them up into Azure, and look at an app modernization or a new app development strategy, okay? Or else you may want to host your application, your front-end application up in Azure, but still hold your data on premises. And I've seen a lot of customers do that. And that's where hybrid applications come in. So how do you get started? Okay, so we get started by using a good old reliable tool that we're all aware of, which is Azure Migrate. And what you can do is you can create an assessment based on Azure VMware Solution within Azure Migrate. 2 ways you can do it, as you can see here from the discovery source. You can do servers discovered from an Azure Migrate appliance, which we've all done. You install your appliance, it does a discovery of your servers. Or the other option is you can do an import from good old RV tools, which is, a tool that is used to take a snapshot in time, or you can run it over time, analyzes your VMware environment, and you can plug that directly in to your Azure Migrate assessment, and it'll give you an overview of what's running and how you right-size your Azure VMware Solution. So within the assessment settings of Azure VMware Solution, number of options here, as we can see. You've got location where you're going to go. You can pick a different storage type, how many years of reserved instance you're going to go. VM size, this one's a bit misleading because this is actually the node size. And I'll look at the SKUs for nodes later on in the presentation. You can set your RAID levels, your CPU, memory commits, your dedupe and compression that you want to have on your storage, and whether this is going to be a stretched cluster, i.e. if you're going to have this connected back and have it fully managed as a full hybrid cluster. For your node size, the assessment is going to take into account the sizing criteria, and then you can obviously look at the pricing and the currency that you want to use. And this is just a list of those options. So once you've got your data in from either your Azure Migrate or from your RV Tools input, you can add the machines and create a new assessment, and you can select your servers to assess based on what you're seeing here. You can pick the servers that are picked up by the assessment, and you can form that as part of your Azure VMware Solution assessment via Azure Migrate. And what it does at the end of it is it spits out this. Okay, so this is where the cost and readiness comes in. So a couple of things to talk about here. Okay, again, these are estimates. Okay, and obviously the better way to do this from an Azure Migrate perspective is to use the Azure Migrate appliance. Leave it running over time to do its discovery, to find the peaks and troughs over the course of 30 days, which you can run, of all the VMs in your on-premises VMware. That way you get a far more accurate snapshot of what your requirements are for the migration. Okay, as you can see here, you've got your assessed virtual machines. We're going to take a look at the readiness options here in the next slide, but this is showing you what CPU resources, memory, and storage resources you're going to need. One important thing to note here, total AVS nodes required, showing you 3 here. You have to commit to a minimum of 3 nodes if you're going to Azure VMware Solution. We looked at the AVS readiness on the last slide, and just to kind of understand what that means. Okay, so 4 options here. First of all, ready for AVS. It means the server can be migrated as is without any changes. You've also got ready with conditions, maybe some compatibility issues, which needs to be remediated. You may be running a deprecated OS or something like that. Not ready for AVS means the VM won't start. And that could be something as simple as you've got an external device like a USB or a CD-ROM attached. And basically what happens there is the vMotion operation is going to fail. And the final option is readiness unknown, and that can happen for things like older Linux-based operating systems, or if you're running things like appliances on premise, so like, network virtual appliances, for example, things like Citrix NetScalers would be a good example, where they'll identify it. They're not going to know what's going to happen with it because they can't identify what type of device it is. Okay, but ultimately you wouldn't be migrating something like a Citrix NetScaler anyway. So, from a high-level design perspective, this is exactly how it looks. Okay, so you've got your on-premises environments where you've got your bare metal hosts and your vCenter. You're going to set up an express route. An express route is the recommended method for accessing and for migrating from your on-premise VMware into Azure VMware Solution. And as you can see, Azure VMware Solution sits within, as standard, an Azure subscription. And it sits alongside and on top of Azure Virtual Networks, and you then get the benefit of all of those Azure services, all of those native services such as VMs, cost management, Key Vault, storage, SQL, Azure Monitor. It's all there, it's all available to you when you do your migration. So what are the steps that you need? You've done your assessment, you know how many hosts you need, okay? You've got to request them. Okay, they're not available on demand. You've got to request them from Microsoft, and you've got to commit to say that you're going to make this request. Okay, and requesting your host quota based on your Azure Migrate assessment, that can take about 5 business days to say, okay, this is ready to go. You need to identify the subscription where your Azure VMware Solution is going to live. And the notice here, this must be an enterprise agreement or a CSP-based subscription, or else it's not going to work. You need to identify the region where your AVS will be hosted. May seem like quite a simple step, but it's an important one for a lot of customers. And as we'll see when we look at hosts, the hosts are not all available in all of the regions. So for example, if we look at North Europe, for example, there's only one type of host that is available in North Europe. So for customers who have specific residency requirements around the data storage, things like that, good examples of that would be, for example, Brexit. And, certain UK companies will only be able to host within the UK South or UK West regions where you've got Azure VMware Solution available to you there. So that's an often overlooked one, but an important one as well. You need to pick a resource group where this is going to live. Let's move on now to look at the SKU options for the hosts, okay? And as you can see here, there are 4 different host types. Now, one important distinction to note here, okay? As you can see, the first 3, you've got various different levels of CPU, RAM, cache and capacity available to you, okay? And you see the region availability over there on the right-hand side, and that's what I'm saying about selected regions. They're not all available in all regions. You just need to make sure that when you're doing your sizing and your pricing, and obviously that comes from your initial assessment where you pick your region where this is going to live, and that's going to define what type of host you get. And maybe in some cases, depending on your size requirements, how many hosts you have to commit to buying, okay? So as you can see, we've got AV36, AV36P, and AV52. The reason I've put AV64 down here in yellow is because that is only available as an add-on host after you have provisioned your initial 3 Azure VMware Solution hosts, okay? So as we saw, if we go back to the pricing, the Azure Migrate output with the pricing on it, it was saying that we need 3 AV36 hosts. You can commit to those, you can request them. If you need the additional storage or additional host, then on top of that, you can go for AV64. Let's move into network. Networking is one of the key components of any solution, no matter what it is. For Azure VMware Solution, and for anyone who's used VMware in the past, obviously, networking is huge, and there's a massive amount of networking there. A colleague of mine recently said to me about Azure VMware Solution, it's probably 80% of the entire thing, okay, because of the complexity that's there, okay. First thing you need to do with Azure VMware Solution is you need to define a network for private cloud management. An Azure VMware Solution requires a /22 CIDR network that cannot overlap with any other Azure or on-premises networks you're using, okay. This is going to be used to manage the solution in full, and it's going to contain all of your management, vMotion, and replication networks that will be automatically provisioned for you, okay. Next up, you need a network for your VM workloads. Again, a couple of gotchas here. It shouldn't overlap with your private cloud management network, but you can extend your on-premises networks into Azure VMware Solution as you want, as is the case with any other Azure solution. So just need to make sure that, you know, in general, it depends on the networks you have. Anyone who's used VMware before, you might have split it into subnets, you might have had different VNets in place. So, you know, just make sure that you're scoping this based on what you're migrating on premises, okay? You need to define the virtual network gateway because you are using an express route circuit. So you need to define what virtual network that's going to sit on. And it can be an existing network. So if you've got an existing express route in place, you can just use that as well. And you also need to define your VMware HCX networking segment. And we'll get into why HCX is important in a few minutes. Finally, once you've all that done, as I said, you can extend your on-premises networks if you wish. Okay, so your network for your VM workloads that you're using on premise, let's say, for example, it's /23 and you're not fully consuming it, you can extend those networks into Azure VMware Solution. There's good documentation on Microsoft Learn about that. From a deployment and integration perspective, so you've requested your hosts and they've been made available to you, you've defined your networking. Within your subscription, you have to register the Azure VMware Solution provider via Azure CLI. You then go ahead and do it. You create your AVS private cloud in Azure via Portal or CLI. You connect your Azure Virtual Network with ExpressRoute. You connect to your on-premises environment. You install and activate your VMware HCX. And VMware HCX is a solution, it's used for app mobility. It's used for simplifying your migrations. It's used for rebalancing your workloads and optimizing your disaster recovery across your data center and your clouds, okay? It has 2 components. You've got HCX Cloud Manager and Connector. Cloud Manager is deployed on the cloud side in Azure VMware Solution, and HCX Connector is deployed on premises, okay? Finally, then you connect to your vCenter. You're ready to go, okay? And effectively, when you're connecting to your vCenter, okay, let's have a look at how this looks then, when it's all up and running, when it's all connected. Okay, this is how it looks from an Azure perspective, and I've picked out VMware credentials here as the screen. You can see your vCenter credentials are here. You can see your NSXT manager credentials are here as well. But you can also see down the left-hand side of the panel here, you've got your connectivity, you've got your clusters, you've got your encryption, you've got identity, you've got storage. You can also extend this out and use other types of storage. You can use native Azure storage, you can use NetApp storage if you want to. You know, there's plenty of options in there. And from a management perspective, we talked about vSphere available and using all of those native VMware tools. They're here. This is how it looks. It looks exactly like you would have had on your on-premises VMware. So the familiarity for your admins, that's a big thing. And it's important to have that familiarity there. You're moving to the cloud, but you're not really losing any of the functionality or having to get into new skill sets. Okay, so that's a bonus. So now that you've done your deployment and we've run through everything there, what are the pros and cons? So the pros and cons, first of all, it's ease of migration. You know, this is going to simplify your transition to the cloud. Okay. From an operational continuity perspective, we just touched on it in the last slide. It uses familiar Azure VMware tools and processes. So for your admins, there isn't a learning curve. But at the back of that, then you've got the scalability to leverage Azure's global infrastructure and to leverage Azure's native services as well. What are the cons? There are potentially higher costs involved. Okay, as you probably saw there from the screen where I was looking at the migrate assessment when it spat out all the figures at me, and this is why I'm not doing a live demo here, because I can't afford 20,000 euro to go ahead and spin up a VMware solution for you. Okay, it is a niche product. It is a product that, you know, is high in cost. You are, when you go into the reserved instances, you are going to have obviously predictable costs, but you're committing to those costs over a 3-year period of reserved instances. If you migrate into VMware Solution and you decide, okay, I'm going to start modernizing now, you're still locked into those costs because you've still got your VMware Solution running. So there is a cost element to think about there, but the costing for Azure VMware Solution includes your licensing. Okay, that's an important distinction. From a complexity, if you're going to do this from a hybrid environment, that can add a certain complexity for you as well, unless you're going fully cloud. And then immediately when you move to the cloud, you might think, okay, great, I'm in the cloud now, I've got Azure VMware Solution, but it's limited modernization. It's a lift and shift rather than a cloud native transformation. You still have to go down the route of that afterwards. So let's take a look at this in terms of Azure VMware Solution versus traditional Azure IaaS. Okay, the benefits of Azure IaaS. Okay, let's say instead of going for Azure VMware Solution, you plugged in your Azure Migrate appliance and you want to just bring this up to VMs. Okay, in the cloud. From a modernization perspective, you get a full integration with the Azure native services, and it enables your cloud native application deployment probably to start a bit quicker. From a flexibility perspective, you know, you can design custom infrastructure and networking solutions. You can have things sitting in different VNets, different subscriptions, different networks, different resource groups. You can go for the full isolation method there. You can still do it in Azure VMware Solution, but probably only from a networking perspective, really. From a cost efficiency, then you've got potentially lower operational costs with pay-as-you-go pricing. Okay. From a native network services benefit, okay, obviously you can utilize advanced networking and security features like Azure Firewall, Azure DDoS protection. If we expand on that into high availability, you could go for stuff like Azure Load Balancer, Traffic Manager. You can utilize stuff like, you know, VM scale sets, availability zones, all that sort of thing. Okay, and you can use global reach to optimize the application delivery and user experience. Now let's move that on a level and let's look at AVS versus Azure PaaS, or basically Azure Cloud Native Solutions, we'll call it. Okay. With the PaaS, you're fully leveraging cloud native capabilities, and that's whether you're doing that with things like native services such as App Service, static web apps, Cosmos DB, Key Vault, things like that. those full modernizations are there available to you. And that's when you'd kind of flip this on its head, target specific VMs that might be running SQL or might be running web services, and actually look to migrate those up into app services. Obviously, with managed services, from an efficiency perspective, you're reducing your management overhead as well. You don't have to worry about OSs or patching VMs because all that's handled for you by Microsoft. And from an innovation perspective, then, there's an accelerated path there because you're getting into advanced services like AI, machine learning, and obviously, as I mentioned, serverless computing. Obviously, with the migration speed of AVS allows the faster migrations with minimal changes. You've got the operational familiarity, as I said, and you've also got a modernization path there. Okay, Azure PaaS requires more effort initially, but it does offer greater long-term benefits. And it may be a case, going back to our use cases, that you may want to do quick data center exit, maybe down to a hardware refresh. Your VMware license may be coming to expiry and you may be pushed into a subscription model. You may want to get off quickly, okay? Fine, you're on Azure VMware Solution, you're in the cloud, but platform as a service and cloud native capabilities, there's greater long-term benefits to it, and you will eventually go down that road. So once we've talked about all that, let's now get into the migration effort comparisons, okay? And if we line these up on a table like this, okay, and we're going to talk for ease of migration, first of all. Obviously, Azure VMware Solution, we've just talked about this, okay? From a landing zone perspective, prepare your landing zone, prepare your networking, request your hosts. It's easy. There's high ease of migration. You plug in your HCX connectors and off you go. You start migrating, okay? With Azure IaaS and native networking, okay, you can pretty much do the same thing. You can do lift and shift of VMs if you want, but there is greater benefits when it comes to the native networking services that I talked about there. For Azure PaaS services then, no, migration isn't easy, but it gives you the longer term benefits. If we go down through them then, from an operational familiarity perspective, yes, Azure VMware Solution gives you high familiarity. IaaS, there's a bit of learning to do with it in terms of, getting to know the Azure services and the native networking. PaaS, there's obviously, a very steep learning curve there. Scalability with Azure VMware Solution, we talked about that. If you're going into reserved instances, it's not that easy to scale down. If you want to scale up, you've got to request more nodes. Pros and cons to that as well. With Azure IaaS and native networking, you've got the scalability there. Let's look at something as simple as expanding a managed disk on a virtual machine. Okay, got to shut the virtual machine down. You got to expand your disk. You may have to move it. You got to back it up. You've got to manage it, etc. With PaaS services, there's high scalability there. It's easy. You effectively click a button, wait 15 minutes, and your app service has grown from 1 SKU to 2 SKUs higher, giving you more computing power. From a cost efficiency perspective, there's high cost efficiency in PaaS, whereas you're getting moderate with the other two. And we talked about the cloud native benefits. PaaS services are going to offer you the highest level of cloud native benefits there. Azure IaaS and native networking, yeah, you're halfway there. You're on a moderate path. With Azure VMware Solution, great, you're in the cloud, but you're not getting any of the cloud native benefits unless you start there towards the other two. From a migration approach level, okay, so Azure VMware Solution, talked about this. Is it easy? Yes, it is. Phase 1, landing zone. Set up your landing zone, set up your networking, your resource group structure, set up your vMotion, your HCX. That's it. You're done, okay? It's a pretty small phase 1, okay, which then sets you up nicely to prepare for your phase 2, which is your migrate, your refactor, and your innovation. And then you get into phase 3, which is your app modernization, okay? We expand a little bit on that. Let's look at the IaaS approach. IaaS approach, phase 1 takes slightly longer because your landing zone design, I'm not going to say there's a bit more to put into it because any landing zone should be done with, the cloud adoption framework and well-architected framework in mind. But you've got other things to think about. You've got lift and shift migration. You've got to set up your backup, your monitoring, your management. Then your disaster recovery comes in, and that's when you start looking towards the app modernization and the innovations. And your modernization, your microservices probably comes a bit later. Look at the PaaS approach. Phase one is much longer if you decide to go straight to PaaS, okay? You're going straight into an app modernization piece. So the other phases get pushed out further, okay? So if we look at the cost comparisons then for those approaches, okay? If we want to migrate to Azure VMware Solution, your migration time, let's be honest about it, depending on the complexity of your workloads, is low, okay? You've requested your hosts, you've set up your networking, you've got your HCX connectors in place, so you're ready to migrate, okay? Move your solution, okay? If you're extending your networks, it's not a problem. If you're not, you're getting into DNS, getting that sort of thing set up, but it's there, it's ready, it's available to you. The cost is low. You've got your VMware skills there, and there's pretty minimal disruption. And I've put none there, but there is pretty minimal disruption to your workforce, okay? Problem is, does it unlock the full potential of Azure? Partially, okay? You've still got access, as I said, to all those services in the background, but you're still running on VMware, okay? If we look at the Azure IaaS and networking, yeah, slightly longer path there. Your migration cost is, slightly higher. Low VMware skills in place there, unless you decide to do kind of a partial migrate to IaaS and a partial move to VMware. Bit of disruption if you're changing services, maybe not so much if you're moving to VMs because the underlying VM is still going to be there. But you're unlocking the full potential of Azure at a future stage. And if you go to Azure PaaS, yeah, that's a longer strategy, okay, because you're into app modernization. Your VMware skills are going away at that point. There's a pretty high disruption. And I say high disruption because you're effectively re-architecting and refactoring your applications that would have been running on your VMware VMs, but you're unlocking the full potential of all of Azure's efficiency, scalability, and cost savings, and your access to future technologies such as AI and machine learning. So, in conclusion, Azure VMware Solution, it's going to give you operational continuity, scalability. It's going to leverage your existing skills and investments. But there are alternatives, and the alternatives there are your Azure IaaS and native networking and your Azure PaaS services. What they're going to give you is that full cloud flexibility, the cost efficiency, and the cloud native benefits that are fully available in Azure. Thank you for watching. Thank you for having me. It's been great to present to you this evening. It's been great being part of Scottish Summit 2024, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks again. Goodbye.